My name is Claire Anderson. For most of my life, I believed Christmas was the one time of year when family mattered more than anything else. It didn't matter how busy we were. It didn't matter how many arguments happened during the year. When December arrived, everyone came home. That was the rule in our family. At least, that was what I believed for nearly 20 years. I was the person who made Christmas happen. I was the one who bought the gifts. I was the one who planned the dinner. I was the one who decorated my parents' house before anyone else even thought about hanging a single ornament. Every year, my mother would say, "Claire, I don't know what we would do without you." And every year, I smiled and answered, "Family takes care of each other." I truly believed those words. I was 42 years old, and I had spent most of my adult life putting my family first. My parents, Robert and Linda Anderson, were getting older. My younger brother, Jason, had his own career, his own house, and his own busy life. So naturally, I became the person everyone depended on. If my parents needed help with appointments, they called me. If the family needed someone to organize holidays, they called me. If there was a problem nobody wanted to deal with, somehow my name always came up, and honestly, I didn't mind, because I thought that was what love looked like. I thought being needed meant being loved. That year, Christmas was supposed to be special. My parents had just renovated their house, and my mother wanted to host the biggest Christmas dinner they had ever had. A month before Christmas, I started preparing. I created a guest list. I ordered decorations. I spent hours searching for the perfect gifts. I even remembered everyone's small preferences. My father liked a certain brand of coffee. My mother loved a specific type of chocolate. Jason's children wanted expensive toys they had been talking about for months. I remembered everything, because I always remembered everything, but something felt different that year. Jason had been acting strange. He rarely answered my messages. He stopped asking how our parents were doing whenever I called. He always sounded rushed. "Claire, can we talk later? I'm busy." I didn't think much of it. I told myself, he has a lot going on. I made excuses for him. I always did. Then, one evening, I received a message from my mother. At first, I was excited. I thought she was sending me the Christmas schedule. Maybe she wanted help planning dinner. Maybe she needed me to pick something up. But when I opened the message, my smile disappeared. It said, "Claire, we need to talk about Christmas this year." A few minutes later, another message appeared, "Things are going to be different." I stared at the screen. Different? I immediately called her. She answered after a few rings, "Mom, is everything okay?" There was a pause. A long pause, then she said, "Claire, we decided to keep Christmas smaller this year." I felt relieved for a moment. "Oh, okay. That's fine. Do you need me to help with anything?" Another silence, then she said something I never expected to hear, "Actually, we don't think you should come this year." I thought I had misunderstood her. "What?" She took a breath. "Your father and I feel like Christmas should just be for parents now." I couldn't speak, the words didn't make sense. "Just for parents?" "Yes." She continued, "You know? Just us and Jason's family." I sat there completely frozen. My own mother was telling me that I wasn't included in Christmas anymore after years of decorating their house, after years of cooking meals, after years of making sure everyone felt loved. Suddenly, I was the person who didn't belong. I forced myself to stay calm. "Mom, did Jason say something?" Immediately, she became defensive. "No, Claire. Don't make this about Jason." But I knew exactly what this was. For years, Jason had always been the favorite. He was the son who could do no wrong, the one everyone celebrated, the one whose achievements were announced proudly, and I was the daughter who quietly kept everything together, the one nobody noticed until something needed to be done. That night, after hanging up the phone, I sat alone in my living room. The Christmas decorations around me suddenly looked different. The lights that once felt warm now felt almost painful, because for the first time in my life, I wondered if my family had ever truly seen me. Or if they had only seen what I could do for them. 3 days later, I received the official Christmas invitation. My parents had sent invitations to everyone except me. My name was missing. No explanation. No apology, just missing. I looked at that invitation for a long time, and something inside me changed. I didn't call my mother. I didn't beg. I didn't ask why. For the first time, I decided I was done trying to earn a place in a family that had already decided I didn't have one. But what they didn't know was this: that Christmas would not be the end of my story. It would be the moment I finally started choosing myself. The weeks after that phone call felt strangely quiet. For the first time in years, I wasn't running around trying to make everyone else's life easier. No messages from my mother asking me to pick something up. No reminders about Christmas decorations. No calls from Jason asking if I could help with something. And the hardest part was, I realized how much of my life had been built around being needed. I had spent so many years believing that if I kept showing up, If I kept helping, if I kept proving my love, my family would eventually see my value, but maybe they never looked at me that way, maybe they only saw the things I did for them, not who I was. Growing up, I always knew Jason was the favorite. Nobody ever said it directly, but children notice things. They notice who gets praised, they notice who gets forgiven, they notice who everyone makes excuses for. Jason was 3 years younger than me when he was little. My parents always talked about how special he was. He's going to do something big one day, my father would say. He has such confidence, my mother would add, and I wanted to believe they saw those same qualities in me, but most of the time, I was the responsible one. The one who didn't cause problems, the one who kept quiet, the one who figured things out on her own. When I got good grades, my parents said, "That's nice, Claire." When Jason barely passed a test, they celebrated because he's trying his best. I never hated my brother, that was the strange part. I loved him. I defended him. I helped him even when I knew things were unfair, because I thought that was what sisters did. After college, our lives went in completely different directions. Jason joined my father's company. It was always expected, everyone knew he would eventually become part of the family business. My father took him under his wing. He taught him everything. They spent weekends together discussing investments, clients, and future plans. Whenever I visited, I would hear, "Jason has a natural business mind. Jason understands people. Jason is exactly what this company needs." I would smile and agree, because what else could I do? I worked hard too. I built my own career from nothing. I paid my own bills. I never asked my parents for financial help, but somehow, independence became something they overlooked. They saw Jason's success as proof that they raised him well. They saw mine as something expected. The strangest thing happened after I stopped going to family dinners. I thought someone would notice. I thought my mother would call. I thought my father would ask, "Claire, is something wrong?" But nobody did. The first Sunday came and went. No phone call. No message. The second Sunday passed, still nothing. Then Thanksgiving arrived. For years, Thanksgiving had been my busiest holiday. I cooked. I organized. I made sure everyone had their favorite dishes. But that year, I stayed home. I sat at my kitchen table with a simple meal I made for myself, and for the first time, I realized something painful. They weren't missing me, they were missing what I provided. A few days after Thanksgiving, I finally received a message from my mother. I stared at my phone when her name appeared. For a moment, my heart jumped. I thought maybe she was calling to apologize, maybe she finally understood how much she had hurt me. I opened the message. It said, "Hope you're doing okay. We had a nice Thanksgiving." That was it. Question. Concern. We missed you. Just a simple update, like I was a distant acquaintance. I put my phone down, and something inside me became clear. I couldn't keep waiting for people to give me a place they had already taken away. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to spend another year chasing approval. I wasn't going to keep trying to prove that I belonged. If my family wanted to see me as someone who didn't matter, then I would stop begging them to see differently. But what I didn't know yet was that walking away from them would open a door I never expected. A door to a life where my success wouldn't depend on anyone's approval. A life where I would finally discover what I was capable of. For the first few months after I stopped showing up, I kept waiting for someone to notice. I would wake up in the morning and check my phone, wondering if there would be a message from my mother. Maybe she would finally ask why I disappeared. Maybe my father would call and say he was sorry. Maybe Jason would realize that his words had hurt me. But every day that passed brought the same silence, and slowly, that silence became my answer. My family wasn't looking for me, they were simply enjoying a life where I was no longer doing the things they expected me to do. For years, I had convinced myself that I was an important part of the family, but when I stepped away, I discovered something painful. I was important only when I was useful. The hardest part wasn't missing Christmas. It wasn't missing Sunday dinners. It wasn't even the fact that my parents didn't call. The hardest part was realizing how much of myself I had given away trying to earn a place that should have always been mine. I thought back to all the years I spent putting everyone else first. I remembered leaving work early to drive my mother to medical appointments. I remembered spending entire weekends helping my father organize paperwork for his business. I remembered buying gifts for my nieces and nephews even when I was struggling financially. I remembered all the moments when someone in my family said, "Claire, we don't know what we would do without you." At the time, those words made me feel loved. Now they felt different, because I started asking myself a question I had avoided for years. If they truly valued me, why did they only seem to remember me when they needed something? After Christmas passed, I decided to make changes, not dramatic changes, not the kind where I announced to everyone that I was cutting them off. I wasn't interested in revenge. I didn't want to hurt I simply wanted to stop hurting myself, for the first time in years. I started making decisions based on what I wanted, not what my family expected. I started small. I changed my daily routine. I stopped checking my phone every few minutes. I stopped wondering whether my mother was upset with me. I stopped replaying that conversation in my head. Instead, I focused on myself, something I hadn't done in a very long time. One of the biggest changes was my career. For years, I had stayed in a comfortable but limited position because I was always available for my family. I turned down opportunities because they required travel. I avoided taking risks because I thought I needed to stay close in case my parents needed me. I had built my entire life around being dependable, but I realized something. Being dependable didn't mean I had to disappear. So I started taking myself seriously. I enrolled in advanced business courses. I attended networking events. I started meeting people outside of my family circle. At first, it felt strange. I wasn't used to introducing myself without mentioning my family. I wasn't used to talking about my own goals. For most of my life, I had been someone's daughter. Someone's sister, someone who helped, but now, for the first time, I was learning who Claire was without those labels. A few months later, I met a woman named Sarah at a business conference. She was one of the first people who asked me a simple question: what do you want to build? Not, what does your family do? Not, how can you help someone else? Just, what do you want? I didn't know how to answer. I remember laughing because the question felt almost impossible. Nobody had asked me that before. Sarah noticed, she smiled and said, sometimes the people who spend their lives taking care of everyone else forget that they're allowed to have dreams too. Those words stayed with me because she was right. I had spent years believing my value came from what I gave. I was finally learning that my value existed even when I wasn't giving anything away. As the months went by, my life slowly changed. I started building professional relationships. I started working on ideas I had abandoned years ago. I started believing that maybe my best years weren't behind me, maybe they were ahead, and the funny thing was, the less I chased my family's approval, the more confident I became. I no longer needed my father to tell me I was successful. I no longer needed my mother to say she was proud of me. I was finally becoming proud of myself. But while I was building a new life, my family had no idea what was happening. They still believed I was the same Claire who would always come back, the same Claire who would eventually apologize, the same Claire who would quietly accept being overlooked. They had no idea that the woman they ignored for years was changing, and they certainly had no idea that one day we would sit across from each other in a business meeting, and they would finally see what I had become. For the first time in my life, I stopped measuring my worth by how my family saw me, and strangely enough, that was when everything began to change. For years, I had lived in the shadow of my brother. And no matter what I accomplished, there always seemed to be someone reminding me that Jason was the one who was going places. He was the son my father trusted, the son whose opinions mattered, the son everyone believed would carry on the family legacy. I used to wonder what it would feel like to finally be chosen. To finally hear my father say, Claire, I'm proud of you. But after years of waiting for that moment, I realized something painful. Maybe that moment was never coming, and maybe I had wasted too much time waiting for someone else to give me permission to believe in myself. After I walked away from my family, I started rebuilding my life from the ground up. It wasn't easy. People often talk about starting over as if it's exciting and fearless, but the truth is, starting over is terrifying, especially when you have spent your entire life being someone else's support system. Suddenly, there was nobody to rescue, nobody to organize things for, nobody to impress, and that forced me to finally face myself. I had to ask questions I had avoided for years. What did I actually want? What kind of life did I want to create? Who was I when I wasn't being the daughter, the sister, or the person everyone called when they needed help? For the first time, I had no answer, but instead of being afraid of that, I decided to discover it. I went back to something I had abandoned years earlier. My career. After graduating, I had always worked hard, but I had never truly allowed myself to chase bigger opportunities. Whenever a promotion required travel, I said no. Whenever a new project required extra time, I worried about whether my family might need me. I had spent years making myself available for everyone else, and in doing so, I had made myself unavailable for my own dreams. So I changed. I updated my skills. I took advanced courses after work. I attended professional events even when I felt uncomfortable walking into a room full of strangers. At first, I felt like an outsider. Everyone seemed confident, everyone seemed to know exactly what they were doing, and there I was, standing in the corner, wondering if I belonged there. But then I remembered something. I had survived years of being ignored by the people whose approval mattered most to me. Compared to that, a room full of strangers wasn't scary anymore. A few months later, I took a risk. I started working on an idea I had been thinking about for Years. It was something related to business. Consulting and helping small companies organize their operations. I had seen so many businesses struggle because they had passion but lacked structure, and because of my experience working around my father's company, I understood those problems better than I realized. For years, I thought my time around the family business had only taught me how invisible I was, but I was wrong. I had been learning, watching, observing, and building knowledge without even knowing it. The very thing my family overlooked became the foundation of my future. The beginning was difficult. There were nights when I sat alone at my kitchen table, surrounded by paperwork, wondering if I had made a mistake. I had no family connections helping me. No father introducing me to important people. No brother opening doors. Everything depended on me, and honestly, that was exactly what I needed, because for the first time, my success would belong completely to me. Nobody could say she only succeeded because Dad helped her. Nobody could say she got lucky because she was part of the family. Every achievement would have my name on it. Slowly, things started changing. Point 1 client became 2.2, became 5.5, became 10. The small project I started at my kitchen table became a real company. I hired my first employee, then my second. I moved from working alone to leading a team, and every time something good happened, I felt something strange. I wasn't thinking about my father. I wasn't imagining how impressed he would be. I wasn't hoping someone from my family would finally notice. I was simply happy because I knew how hard I had worked, happy because I knew nobody had given me anything. I had built this. One evening, after closing a major business deal, I sat in my office alone. It was late, the city lights were shining outside my window. I looked around the room, the company logo on the wall, the contracts on my desk, the team I had built, and I thought about the girl I used to be, the girl who sat quietly at family dinners hoping someone would notice her, the girl who thought being loved meant constantly proving her usefulness. I wished I could go back and tell her something. I would tell her, you don't have to compete for a place in someone's heart. You don't have to beg people to see your value. Your worth was never determined by whether they recognized it. While my life was changing, my family continued living as if nothing had happened. They still believed I was the same person who walked away from Christmas. They believed I was probably lonely. They believed eventually I would come back, because that was what I had always done. I always returned. I always forgave. I always made things easier, but this time was different. I wasn't waiting outside the door hoping they would let me back in. I had built my own door. My own home. My own future. Then one afternoon, something unexpected happened. I received an email about a potential business partnership. A major company was looking for someone with experience in my field. I opened the attachment and started reading the details. Then I saw the company name. I froze, because it was a company I knew very well. A company connected to my father's business. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. After all these years, our paths were about to cross again, but this time, things would be different. I was no longer the daughter sitting silently at the dinner table. I was no longer the person they forgot to congratulate. I was a business owner. A decision maker, someone they could no longer ignore, and they were about to discover that the daughter they underestimated had become someone they never expected. The email sat open on my computer screen for almost 10 minutes. I read the company name again and again, hoping I was wrong, but I wasn't. The potential partnership was connected to my father's business, the same business where my brother Jason had always been seen as the future, the same company where I had spent years watching my father teach him everything, the same place where I had always felt like an outsider looking through a window. And now, after all these years, I was being invited to sit at the same table, not as Jason's sister, not as my father's daughter, but as the owner of a company they wanted to work with. My first reaction wasn't anger. It wasn't excitement either. It was fear. I never expected to see them again under these circumstances. For years, I had imagined what would happen if my family finally saw what I had accomplished. Sometimes I imagined my father apologizing, sometimes I imagined Jason admitting he had been wrong, but when the moment actually came, I realized I didn't need any of that anymore. The old Claire would have walked into that meeting hoping for approval. The old Claire would have watched my father's expression carefully, looking for any sign that he was finally proud of me, but I wasn't that person anymore. I had spent years building myself without their recognition. I had learned how to stand on my own. The day of the meeting arrived. I arrived early, not because I was nervous, because preparation had become part of who I was. I reviewed every document, every number, every possible question. I wasn't there to prove a point. I was there because I had earned my place. When I entered the conference room, I saw them. My father was sitting at the end of the table, Jason was next to him, for a few seconds. Nobody spoke, the silence was uncomfortable. My father looked older than I remembered, his hair had become more gray, his shoulders seemed heavier, but the biggest difference was the look on his face. He looked surprised, almost confused, like he was trying to understand how I had ended up there. Claire. That was the first word he said, not, hello. Not, how have you been? Just my name. As if he couldn't believe I was the person walking into that room. I smiled politely, good morning. I sat down, and for the first time in my life, I noticed something. Nobody was treating me like the younger daughter anymore. The meeting began. My team presented our proposal. We explained our strategy. We answered questions. We discussed numbers and future plans. I watched my father carefully, not because I wanted his approval, but because I wanted to see if he understood. Did he see the woman sitting in front of him? Or was he still seeing the daughter he ignored? At one point, my father asked, how did you build something like this? It was a simple question, but I knew what he was really asking. How did the daughter we overlooked become someone sitting across from us? I answered calmly, I worked hard. I learned. I made mistakes. I kept going. I didn't mention the years of feeling invisible. I didn't mention the Christmas invitation. I didn't mention the nights I cried wondering why I was never enough. This meeting wasn't about revenge. It was about showing up as the person I had become. During a break, Jason approached me, for the first time in years. He looked uncomfortable around me, not confident, not superior, uncertain. Claire? I didn't know. I looked at him, didn't know what? He looked down, I didn't know you were doing all this. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because it was exactly the problem. Nobody knew, nobody asked, nobody cared enough to look. I said. That's because nobody ever asked. The words were quiet, but they hit harder than any argument could have. Jason didn't respond, because he knew I was right. After the meeting, my father asked if we could talk privately. For a moment, I thought about saying no. The old version of me would have immediately agreed. She would have been desperate for that conversation, but the woman I was now wanted to know why. So I followed him. We stood outside the conference room. My father looked uncomfortable, something I had almost never seen before. I'm proud of you, he said. Point four words I had wanted to hear my entire life, and yet they didn't feel the way I imagined. Years ago, those words would have meant everything. They would have erased every disappointment, every forgotten achievement, every moment I felt invisible. But now? They were simply words. I smiled slightly. Thank you. My father looked surprised. Maybe he expected me to cry, maybe he expected me to finally feel accepted, but I had already accepted myself. He continued, Claire, I know things weren't always easy. That sentence bothered me, because it was almost an apology, but not quite. It was the kind of sentence people use when they know something was wrong, but don't want to fully admit it. I looked at him and said, Dad, I spent years trying to prove that I belonged in this family. He stayed quiet. I thought if I worked harder, helped more, and achieved more, eventually you would see me. My voice remained calm, but I realized something. What? I was never the problem. I was just looking for acceptance from people who weren't paying attention. For the first time, my father looked genuinely hurt, not angry, not defensive, just hurt, because maybe he was finally understanding what his choices had done. He had never intentionally destroyed my confidence, but that didn't mean he hadn't damaged it. Sometimes the deepest wounds don't come from what people do, they come from what they repeatedly fail to do. That evening, after leaving the meeting, I drove home feeling strangely peaceful. Years ago, I imagined this moment differently. I imagined standing in front of my family and proving them wrong, but the truth was, I didn't feel like I had won, because winning would mean I was still competing, and I wasn't. I had already moved beyond that. The biggest victory wasn't that my father finally saw me, the biggest victory was that I no longer needed him to, but I knew something had changed. My family had finally seen the life I built without them, and for the first time, they had to face the possibility that the person they ignored for years was never the one who was lost. They were. For the first time in years, my family was seeing me differently, but what surprised me the most was that I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. I had spent so much time imagining this moment, the moment when my father would finally understand, the moment when Jason would finally realize that I wasn't the person they thought I was, the moment when they would regret overlooking me. But standing there in that conference room, I realized something important. Their regret was no longer the thing I was waiting for. I had already moved on. A few weeks after the business meeting, my father started reaching out more often. First, the messages were simple: hope you're doing well. Have you been busy? How is the company going? They were normal questions, the kind of questions a father should have asked years ago, but I noticed something. He was trying, and although part of me wanted to stay angry, another part of me remembered something. My father was still my father. The problem was that for too many years, I had been the only one trying to hold our relationship together. Now, for the first time, he was making an effort. One evening, my phone rang. I looked at the screen. It was my father. I almost didn't answer, not because I hated him, but because I had spent so long protecting my peace that I wasn't sure if opening that door again would hurt me. After a few seconds, I answered, "Hello, Dad." There was a pause, then he said, "I was wondering if we could have dinner. Just the two of us. No business. No Jason. No family event, just a conversation." I agreed, but I told myself one thing before meeting him. I wasn't going there to get an apology. I wasn't going there to hear excuses. I was going there as the person I had become. We met at a small restaurant near his office. When I walked in, my father was already sitting there. He stood up when he saw me. That surprised me, because growing up, my father had always been someone who expected others to come to him, but that night felt different. He looked nervous, almost like he didn't know how to talk to me anymore. We ordered dinner for several minutes. We talked about simple things: work, the weather, the city, anything except the past. Eventually, my father put down his glass. "Claire, I owe you an apology." I didn't say anything. I just listened. I spent a lot of years thinking that because Jason was involved in the family business, he was the one who would carry everything forward. He looked down, and "I think I forgot to see what you were doing." Those words were difficult to hear, not because they hurt, because they confirmed something I already knew for years. I had been invisible. My father continued, "I always thought you were strong." I almost smiled, because that was exactly the problem. People often assume the strong person doesn't need anything. They assume the person who handles everything doesn't need support. They forget that strong people get tired too. I looked at him and said, "Dad, being strong doesn't mean I didn't need you." He became quiet. "I needed you to notice me. Not because I needed praise, but because I wanted to know that I mattered." My father looked emotional, and for the first time, I saw him not as the person who hurt me, but as a person who finally understood the pain he had caused. A few days later, I received another unexpected call. This time, it was Jason. I stared at the phone before answering. Our relationship had always been complicated. I loved my brother, but I couldn't ignore how many times he benefited from being the favorite. When I answered, his voice sounded different. "Claire, can we talk?" I said, "Sure." There was a long silence, then he said, "I was wrong." Those 3 words caught me off guard, because Jason was not someone who admitted mistakes easily. He continued, "I always thought you were just there." I didn't respond. "I thought because you weren't running the company and you weren't making big decisions, you weren't doing much." He sighed, "But I didn't realize how much you were carrying." I asked him a question, "Jason, did you ever wonder why I stopped coming around?" Another silence. Finally, he said, "Yes. But you never asked." He didn't have an answer, because there wasn't one. That was the hardest truth. My family didn't lose me because of one argument. They lost me because for years, nobody thought losing me was possible. They assumed I would always be there, always helping, always forgiving, always returning. Over the next few months, things slowly changed, not perfectly, not overnight. Some wounds don't disappear just because someone says sorry, but there was something different. My family started seeing me as a person, not just as the daughter who helped, not just as the sister who solved problems. They started asking about my life. My goals. My dreams. My thoughts, things they should have asked years earlier. One Sunday afternoon, my mother called me. She asked if I wanted to come over for dinner. The old Claire would have immediately said yes. She would have dropped everything. She would have spent hours preparing something to bring, but the new Claire paused. I had learned something important. Forgiveness did not mean going back to the way things were. Love did not mean accepting the same pain again. So I agreed, but I went with a different mindset. I wasn't going back to earn my place. I was going back because I chose to. That dinner was different from every family dinner before it. For once, nobody was talking about Jason's achievements, nobody was comparing us, nobody was making me feel like I was less important. My father asked about my company. My mother asked about my plans. Jason actually listened, and sitting there, I realized something. I didn't need them to rewrite the past. I didn't need them to pretend they had never hurt me. I just needed them to finally understand. But the biggest change wasn't in my family. It was in me. Years ago, I would have considered this moment the ending. I would have thought, my family finally accepts me. But now I understood something deeper. My life didn't begin when they accepted me. My life began when I accepted myself, and that was something nobody could ever take away from me. For a long time, I thought the greatest victory in my life would be hearing my father say he was proud of me. I imagined that moment so many times. I imagined him looking at me and finally realizing that I was never the disappointment he made me feel like. I imagined Jason admitting that he had underestimated me. I imagined my family finally seeing the person I had always been, but when that moment finally came, I realized something. The person who needed that approval the most was the younger version of me. The woman I was now had already learned how to stand without it. After everything that happened, my relationship with my family slowly changed, not into some perfect story where everyone suddenly forgot the past. Real life doesn't work that way. Some wounds leave marks, some memories stay with you, but the difference was that I no longer carried those memories as proof that I wasn't enough. I carried them as proof that I survived. For years, I thought my family had the power to decide my value. If my father praised me, I felt worthy. If my mother noticed me, I felt important. If Jason respected me, I felt like I belonged. But I finally understood something: nobody should have the power to decide whether you matter, not even the people who raised you. A few months later, my company reached another milestone. We signed one of the biggest partnerships we had ever received. My team celebrated. There was a small gathering at the office. People gave speeches, they talked about the journey, they talked about how much work had gone into building the company, and as I stood there listening, I thought about the girl I used to be, the girl who sat quietly at family dinners, the girl who watched her brother receive praise while her own achievements were ignored, the girl who believed she had to work twice as hard just to be noticed. I wished I could go back and tell her, one day, you will stop waiting for people to choose you. One day, you will choose yourself. After the celebration, I drove home alone. It was late, the city was quiet, and for some reason, I found myself thinking about Christmas, the Christmas when my family told me I wasn't welcome. And back then, I thought that moment destroyed something inside me, but now I saw it differently. That moment didn't destroy me. It freed me, because sometimes the most painful moments are the ones that force us to stop living a life that was never truly ours. My mother once asked me if I regretted walking away. I thought about that question for a long time. Did I regret missing holidays? Did I regret losing years with my family? Did I regret not fighting harder to make them understand? The honest answer was complicated. I regretted that things became that painful. I regretted that it took losing me for them to realize my value, but I didn't regret choosing myself, because staying would have meant continuing to accept the same hurt, and leaving gave everyone a chance to change, including me. Jason and I eventually built a different kind of relationship, not the relationship we had when we were children, not one based on competition or comparison, but one based on honesty. One day, he told me something I never expected. He said, I used to think you were lucky because you didn't have the pressure I had. I looked at him. He continued, but now I realize you had a different kind of pressure. You were carrying everyone while nobody was looking. That meant more than any apology, because for the first time, my brother understood. He wasn't just seeing my success. He was seeing my struggle. My father also changed. He started asking questions, real questions, not questions out of politeness, questions because he genuinely wanted to know. He asked about my plans. He asked about my ideas. He asked for my opinion, and sometimes I still noticed the old habits. Sometimes he would start praising Jason before remembering to include me. Sometimes old family patterns would appear, but the difference was, I no longer took it personally. I no longer felt like I had to compete. I no longer felt invisible, because I knew who I was. Years ago, my biggest fear was losing my family. I thought if I walked away, I would have nothing, but what I discovered was the opposite. I didn't lose myself when I walked away. I found myself. I found confidence. I found independence. I found people who valued me for who I was, not just what I could do for them, and most importantly, I learned that love should never require you to constantly prove your worth. Today, I still have a relationship with my family, but it is different, healthier. There are boundaries now. I no longer say yes to everything. I no longer sacrifice my happiness just to avoid disappointing someone else. I still love my family, but I love myself too, and that was something I had forgotten for far too long. Looking back, I don't think my family's biggest mistake was forgetting my graduation. It wasn't ignoring my achievements. It wasn't even excluding me from Christmas. Their biggest mistake was assuming I would always be there no matter how they treated me. They thought I needed them more than they needed me. They were wrong, because the moment I stopped begging to be included, I discovered I had the power to create a life where I was always welcome. The little girl who once waited for her father to notice her finally understood something. She was never invisible, she was never a burden, she was never less important, she was simply surrounded by people who didn't know how to see her, and when they finally opened their eyes, They discovered that the person they had overlooked for years had become someone they could no longer ignore.